April 12, 1945. The air smelled of diesel, cordite, and spring. Captain William Iron Bill Thompson stood atop his M4 Sherman tank, field glasses pressed against his weathered face. The German countryside stretched before him, deceptively peaceful. Rolling hills of emerald green dotted with farmhouses and the occasional church spire. Beautiful country to die in. "Movement at 2 o'clock, Captain." The voice of his gunner, Private Jenkins, crackled through the intercom. Thompson adjusted his glasses. Through the morning haze, he could make out the unmistakable silhouette of a German Panther tank, its long barrel like an accusing finger pointing directly at his column. "All units, this is Iron Bill. Enemy armor at 2 o'clock. Spread out, standard formation. Remember your training." His voice was steady, betraying none of the dread pooling in his stomach. They were good men, his tank crew, the best the 3rd Armored Division had to offer. But the Sherman was a coffin on tracks compared to those German beasts. The men knew it. He knew it, and the Germans definitely knew it. The first shell whistled overhead, landing short and to the left. A warning shot. Then hell broke loose. 3 more Panthers emerged from the tree line, followed by the massive, boxy shape of a tiger. "Target identified. Panther 800 yards, Jenkins called out. "Fire when ready." Thompson ducked into the turret as the Sherman's 75mm gun roared in response. Their shell struck the Panther squarely on its front glissades and bounced off harmlessly. The German tank didn't even slow down. "Reload, armor piercing!" But it was too late. The Panther's 75mm gun barked once. Thompson felt his Sherman shudder violently. The acrid smell of burning hydraulic fluid filled the compartment. "We're hit! Engine compartment!" Thompson's radio crackled with desperate calls from his other tanks. To his left, another Sherman burst into flames, its crew scrambling out of the hatches, clothes aflame. "All units, fall back to defensive position Alpha." Through the smoke and chaos, Thompson spotted something unexpected. A train, its black locomotive belching coal smoke, snaking along the valley floor a mile distant. Flat cars loaded with what could only be more German tanks. Fresh reinforcements, being delivered right to the battlefield. "Command, this is Iron Bill. Enemy receiving armor reinforcements by rail. Request air support to interdict. Over." The crackling response came back almost immediately. "Negative, Iron Bill. All air assets engaged elsewhere. Hold your position. Out." Thompson watched helplessly as the train disappeared around a bend. How many more tanks would they face tomorrow? The day after? Despite the Allied bombing campaign that had reduced German cities to rubble, their war machine somehow kept functioning, kept producing the weapons that were killing his men. As he ordered his battered company to retreat, a thought burned itself into his mind. How was this possible? How, after years of strategic bombing, could Germany still produce and transport tanks and locomotives with such apparent ease? It was a question that would haunt him for 30 years. Fort Knox, Kentucky, June 17, 1975. Colonel William Thompson, retired, stood at the window of the conference room, watching young recruits train on the new M60 Patton tanks. At 57, his once jet-black hair had turned steel gray, and deep lines marked his face. But his posture remained military straight, his blue eyes sharp and observant. A door opened behind him. "Bill, thanks for coming on such short notice." Thompson turned. General James Maxwell, Director of Strategic Development, was a tall man with thinning blonde hair and the harried look of someone carrying too many responsibilities. They had served together in Korea a lifetime ago. "When a 3-star general invites you to Fort Knox, you don't exactly say no." Thompson shook Maxwell's offered hand. "Though I admit I'm curious what was so urgent." Maxwell gestured to the conference table. "Please sit." The table was covered with folders stamped with various security classifications. A projector had been set up at one end. Maxwell closed the door, checking that it was securely locked before joining Thompson. "What I'm about to share is classified top secret. Even my staff doesn't know the full picture." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were aerial reconnaissance photos of what appeared to be massive industrial complexes. These are Soviet tank factories: Kharkov, Nizhny Tagil, Omsk. Thompson studied the photos. Impressive facilities. They're producing T-72s at an estimated rate of 150 per month. That's nearly 2,000 tanks per year. Thompson nodded. The T-72 is a formidable machine. Not as sophisticated as our M60, but effective. And that's the problem. Maxwell flipped to another series of photos. Our intelligence suggests that they've been systematically improving the design, Each production run incorporates refinements. The latest models have composite armor that may be able to withstand our standard ammunition. Thompson felt a familiar unease, history repeating itself. Our Sherman versus their Tigers and Panthers. Exactly. Maxwell turned on the projector. A chart illuminated the wall comparing Soviet and American tank production. We're producing 25 M60s per month. They're outproducing us 6-1. Quality versus quantity, Thompson said, the eternal debate. But what if they're closing the quality gap? Maxwell changed slides, showing a comparative analysis of tank capabilities. Their production methods have become more efficient without sacrificing combat effectiveness. We believe they've been studying and implementing manufacturing techniques developed by Nazi Germany during World War II. Thompson's mind flashed back to that day in 1945, the train full of tanks while his Shermans burned. The Germans were masters of efficient production, even under constant bombing. That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. Maxwell pulled out another folder, this one older, its edges frayed. This is a report compiled by Army Intelligence in 1945, a study of German industrial capacity focusing on locomotive production. Locomotives? Thompson raised an eyebrow. Yes, the report was classified and essentially buried after the war. Few people have seen it. Maxwell opened the folder. It details how German locomotive production actually increased under Allied bombing, from 150 locomotives per month in 1942 to an astonishing 535 per month by August 1943. Thompson leaned forward. That's impossible. We were bombing them day and night. Apparently not impossible. And here's where it gets interesting. Maxwell flipped to a page with a production comparison chart. While we were bombing their railways and marshalling yards, we never specifically targeted their locomotive manufacturing facilities. They were considered too small and dispersed to be worth the effort. The implications dawned on Thompson slowly. So they kept producing, even as we thought we were crippling their transportation network. Precisely. And the Soviets have apparently learned from this. They've dispersed their tank manufacturing capabilities, making them less vulnerable to potential airstrikes. But there's more. Maxwell pulled out a final document. I need your help, Bill. Thompson took the paper. It was a mission brief. Operation Steel Titan. I'm forming a special research unit. Small, discreet, but with access to whatever resources they need. The mission is to analyze German industrial production methods from World War II, particularly their locomotive and tank manufacturing, and determine how they achieved such efficiency under wartime conditions. And how the Soviets may have adapted those methods, Thompson added. Exactly. If we're entering an extended period of tension with the Soviets, we need to understand their industrial capacity and methods. We need to know if we could match their production in a prolonged conflict. Thompson studied his old friend. Why me, James? I'm retired. I was a tank commander, not an industrial engineer. Because you were there. You saw it firsthand. You've been asking questions about German production capability since 1945. And because I need someone who understands both the technical and combat aspects of armored warfare. Maxwell leaned forward. Plus, you're stubborn and don't care much for bureaucracy. This investigation might ruffle some feathers. Thompson looked again at the young recruits outside the window, training on their tanks. In his mind, he saw his own men burning in their inadequate Shermans. He'd written reports after the war, questioning why American tanks had been consistently outclassed by German models. Those reports had been politely acknowledged and then ignored. When do I start? Maxwell smiled. Immediately, I've assembled a team for you. He pressed a button on his desk phone. Send them in, please. 3 people entered the room. Maxwell made the introductions. Samuel Wilson, our data analyst, Princeton-educated, specializes in industrial output metrics. Wilson was a slender black man in his 30s, wearing thick glasses and a serious expression. He nodded respectfully. Colonel Thompson, your reputation precedes you. Elizabeth Carter, mechanical engineer, MIT graduate, specializes in production systems. Carter was a woman in her early 40s with auburn hair and intelligent green eyes. An honor, sir. I've studied your combat reports from the European theater. And finally, Robert Miller, military historian with a focus on World War II industrial mobilization. Miller was older, perhaps in his 50s, with a professor's tweed jacket and an eager expression. Colonel, I've long wanted to discuss your experiences with German armor. Thompson assessed the team, young, brilliant, but probably lacking in practical experience. Still, they seemed eager, and that counted for something. "Your office is ready," Maxwell said. "All the original documentation we could find on German locomotive and tank production has been gathered. You'll have clearance to request additional materials as needed." As the meeting concluded and the team left to get settled in their new workspace, Maxwell held Thompson back. "One more thing, Bill. Not everyone in the Pentagon is enthusiastic about this project. There are those who believe our current production methods are perfectly adequate. They see this as an unnecessary examination of past failures." "People don't like being told they're doing things wrong," Thompson replied, "especially when they've built careers on those methods. Just watch your back. This is supposed to be about the Soviets, but you might find resistance closer to home." Thompson nodded, understanding the warning. As he walked through the corridors of Fort Knox toward his new office, memories flooded back. The smell of burning Sherman tanks, the screams of his men, the sight of that German train calmly delivering more tanks to kill more Americans. 30 years had passed, but the questions had never left him. Now, finally, he might get some answers. That night, alone in his temporary quarters, Thompson opened a worn leather case. Inside was his service pistol, medals, and a small leather-bound journal. He turned to entries from April 1945, reading his own hurried handwriting by lamplight. "Lost B Company today. 4 Panthers, 1 Tiger, 17 Shermans destroyed, 34 good men gone. Request for improved armor again denied. Command says we build 5 Shermans for every German tank. Cold comfort to the men inside when the shells penetrate." He closed the journal, the faces of those lost men vivid in his memory. If his new mission could prevent such losses in any future conflict, it would be worth whatever resistance he encountered. The next morning, Thompson found his team already at work in their assigned space, a converted classroom in one of Fort Knox administrative buildings. Maps covered one wall, production charts another. Wilson was organizing data on a chalkboard while Carter reviewed technical diagrams. Miller was buried in historical documents. "Good morning," Thompson said, entering the room. "Let's get started." For the next week, they immersed themselves in the data. The more they discovered, the more astounding the picture became. "The numbers are incredible," Wilson said during one briefing. German locomotive production not only continued under Allied bombing, it became more efficient. Each worker in 1944 was producing 27% more output than in 1943, and more than twice as efficient as in 1941. Carter added her insights. They simplified their designs. The Class 44 locomotive required about 60,000 man-hours to assemble. The Class 50 needed only half that, and the wartime Class 52 reduced it further to about 40% of the original. And the quality didn't suffer significantly, Miller noted. The wartime locomotives remained in service in West Germany until the late 1970s, even longer in East Germany. Thompson paced the room, processing the information. "So they produced more with less. How?" "Design simplification," Carter explained. "They eliminated unnecessary components, standardized parts, optimized assembly sequences. But most importantly, they designed specifically for efficient production, not just performance." Thompson stopped at a map showing German locomotive plants. "And these facilities were never targeted?" "Rarely," Miller confirmed. Allied bombing focused on marshalling yards, railway lines, bridges. The manufacturing plants were considered secondary targets. When they were hit, it was usually collateral damage, and the Germans proved remarkably adept at restoring production. Thompson's mind was racing. What about tank production? Was there a similar pattern? Carter pulled out more diagrams. Yes and no. Tank factories were targeted more heavily, but the Germans applied the same principles. The Panther tank, for example, was continuously simplified for production while maintaining or improving its combat effectiveness. And here's the kicker, Wilson added. Henschel and Sohn, the company that built Tiger tanks, was also one of Germany's largest locomotive manufacturers. Thompson felt a chill. They applied the same production philosophy to both. Exactly, Carter confirmed. And we have evidence suggesting the Soviets studied these methods extensively after the war. Their T-34 tank evolved using similar principles of design simplification for mass production. For Thompson, pieces of a puzzle 30 years old were finally fitting together. The Germans had mastered something that America, with all its industrial might, had missed: how to balance quality and quantity through intelligent design and production methods. "I need to see these production facilities," he said suddenly. "Are any of them still standing?" Miller nodded. Several were in what became East Germany. The Soviets took them over. But Henschel's plants in Kassel ended up in West Germany. They're still producing railroad equipment. And Detroit, Thompson asked, and the American tank plants from the war? Chrysler Tank Arsenal was converted to automobile production after the war, Carter said. But some of the original engineers and managers are still alive. That's our next step, Thompson decided. We need to talk to people who were there, on both sides. 2 days later, Thompson found himself in Detroit, walking through the cavernous space that had once been the heart of America's tank production. His guide was Walter Jenkins, a spry 75-year-old who had served as a production manager during the war. 25,000 Sherman tanks built right here, Jenkins said proudly, his voice echoing in the now repurposed automobile factory. One every 30 minutes at our peak. Assembly line ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Thompson ran his hand along a support column, imagining the scene. Impressive output. Damn right it was. We outproduced the Germans 5-1. But their tanks outperformed ours, Thompson said quietly. Jenkins's smile faltered. Well, yes, the Sherman had its limitations. Thin armor, underpowered gun, but we could make so many of them. Was that a deliberate trade-off, quality for quantity? Jenkins hesitated. There were debates. Some engineers wanted to build a heavier tank with better armor and a more powerful gun. But that would have meant retooling the entire production line, slowing output. So the decision was made to stick with the Sherman, despite its known deficiencies. It wasn't my decision, Colonel. Jenkins suddenly looked every one of his 75 years. We built what we were told to build as fast as we could build it. Thompson nodded, understanding. I'm not blaming you, Mr. Jenkins. I'm trying to understand the philosophy behind the decisions. Jenkins led him to a small office off the main floor, closing the door behind them. From a filing cabinet, he pulled out a faded folder. These are internal memos from 1943 and 1944. Assessments of the Sherman versus German tanks, production capacity studies, engineering proposals for improvements. Thompson leafed through the documents. One caught his eye, a detailed proposal for an improved Sherman with thicker armor and a 90mm gun, dated June 1943. Across it was stamped in red, denied, production delay unacceptable. The Army knew, Thompson said, a cold anger building inside him. Everyone knew, Jenkins replied. The Germans had better tanks. But the strategy was to overwhelm them with numbers. And it worked, didn't it? We won the war. At what cost? Thompson thought of his burned men, his destroyed tanks. Did anyone calculate how many extra American lives were lost because of this decision? Jenkins had no answer for that. Back at his hotel that evening, Thompson called Maxwell with an update. The production philosophy was explicit, quantity over quality at all costs. Even when improvements were technically feasible, they were rejected to maintain production rates. That matches what we suspected, Maxwell replied, his voice tinny over the secure line. What's your next step? I want to examine the captured German documents more thoroughly. There's something we're missing. The Germans managed to improve their designs while maintaining or increasing production. We somehow convinced ourselves that was impossible. Be careful, Bill. I've been hearing rumblings from the Pentagon. Some people are nervous about what you might find. Let them be nervous. The truth is what matters. After hanging up, Thompson stared out at the Detroit skyline, the heart of American industrial might. Somewhere in the collected data, in the production records and engineering reports, lay answers that could reshape America's approach to weapons manufacturing. Answers that could save American lives in any future conflict. The next morning, he received an unexpected package at his hotel. No return address, just his name typed on a plain brown envelope. Inside was a single document, a declassified report titled Operation Crossroads. Thompson's hands trembled slightly as he read. Operation Crossroads had been a classified directive issued in 1943, instructing Army Air Force planners to avoid targeting certain German industrial facilities, including specific locomotive plants. The stated reason: preservation of essential industrial infrastructure for post-war European recovery. But a handwritten note in the margin, initialed by someone in Army intelligence, told a different story. Actual reason? These facilities to be captured intact for technical analysis and potential U.S. acquisition. America had deliberately avoided destroying German locomotive plants because they wanted to study and potentially use the technology after the war. Yet somehow that study had never led to the implementation of the production methods that made those plants so efficient. Thompson felt a surge of both validation and anger. The answers had been there all along, buried in classified reports and deliberate omissions. While American soldiers died in inferior tanks, strategists had been thinking about post-war industrial advantages. He immediately called Carter. "I need you to find everything we have on the post-war technical analysis of German locomotive plants, reports, studies, recommendations, everything." "That's a tall order, Colonel. Most of that would have been classified. Use General Maxwell's authorization and contact Miller. He may know where to look in the historical archives." A new urgency drove Thompson. This wasn't just about understanding Soviet production methods anymore. It was about uncovering a 30-year-old decision that had sacrificed American lives for industrial expediency and then buried the evidence. When he returned to Fort Knox the following day, Thompson found his team energized by the new direction. Miller had located additional archives of captured German documents, while Wilson had compiled a comprehensive statistical analysis of production efficiency comparisons. But it was Carter who made the most startling discovery. "Colonel, I've found references to a special type of locomotive the Germans developed during the war. The Class 52 condensations tender locomotive, a condensing steam locomotive." She spread technical diagrams on the table. Instead of releasing steam, it recaptured and condensed it back into water in the tender. This gave it a range of 1,000 kilometers without refilling water, compared to about 150 kilometers for standard locomotives. Thompson studied the diagrams with growing interest. That's an incredible advantage for military operations, especially in water-scarce regions like the Eastern Front. Exactly. And it had another benefit: minimal visible exhaust. Without the telltale plume of steam, these locomotives were much harder for aircraft to spot. Thompson's mind immediately made the connection to tanks. Increased range and reduced detection signature, both critical factors in armored warfare. "There's more," Carter continued. "The condensing system was an elegant engineering solution, but what's truly remarkable is that they developed and implemented it while simultaneously simplifying the overall locomotive design for mass production. They improved capability while reducing manufacturing complexity." Thompson thought back to the battlefields of Europe, where German Panthers and Tigers had outgunned and out-armored his Shermans, yet were still produced in sufficient numbers to maintain a deadly presence until the war's end. "This is the missing piece," he said. "The Germans found a way to improve performance while streamlining production. We convinced ourselves it was an either-or proposition, either mass production of adequate equipment or limited production of superior equipment." "And the Soviets?" Wilson asked. "If they studied these methods as thoroughly as we suspect, they may have applied the same principles to their tank design and production, which would explain how they're closing the quality gap while maintaining their numerical advantage." Thompson felt a growing sense of urgency. The implications for American military preparedness were profound. If the Soviets could indeed produce tanks that approached Western quality standards while maintaining their traditional numerical superiority, the balance of power in Europe could shift dramatically. But as his team dug deeper into the historical records and technical analyses, Thompson began to sense resistance from unexpected quarters. Requested documents arrived heavily redacted or didn't arrive at all. Access to certain archives was suddenly restricted due to ongoing reorganization. Then came the most troubling development. Returning to their office one morning, they found it had been searched. Nothing was overtly missing, but files had been moved, cabinets left slightly ajar. "Someone's nervous about what we're finding," Thompson told his team, "which means we're on the right track." That afternoon, he received a summons to General Maxwell's office. When he arrived, he found Maxwell was not alone. Colonel Richard Blackwood from the Pentagon's procurement division sat across from Maxwell, his expression coldly professional. "Colonel Thompson," Blackwood nodded curtly, "I've been reviewing your project." "Have you?" Thompson remained standing. "I wasn't aware procurement had oversight of our research. When it potentially impacts acquisition strategies and industrial relationships, it becomes our concern." Blackwood's voice was smooth, practiced. "Your investigation seems to be operating under some questionable assumptions." "Such as?" "The notion that World War II German production methods would have relevance to modern American defense manufacturing. Our industrial base is entirely different now." "The principles remain valid," Thompson countered. "Efficient design for production, standardization, continuous improvement within existing manufacturing parameters. Principles the American defense industry already implements," Blackwood said dismissively. "Do they?" "Our research suggests otherwise. Modern American tanks take more man-hours to produce than their Soviet counterparts, with questionable advantages in combat effectiveness. Blackwood's expression hardened. Careful, Colonel. You're verging on criticizing established procurement policies that have been developed by experts over decades. If those policies are wrong, they should be criticized. Maxwell, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Gentlemen, this isn't productive. Colonel Blackwood, I authorize this research to explore historical manufacturing methods and their potential modern applications. That mission hasn't changed. The Joint Chiefs are concerned about potential implications for current procurement contracts, Blackwood replied. Billions of dollars and thousands of jobs are at stake. And there it was, Thompson thought. The real concern, money and contracts, not combat effectiveness or soldier survival. With respect, Colonel, Thompson said, his voice level but intense, I commanded Sherman tanks against Panthers and Tigers. I watched good men die because our equipment was inferior. If similar disparities exist or are developing between our tanks and Soviet models, we need to address them, regardless of the implications for defense contractors. Blackwood stood. This conversation isn't over, Thompson. The Pentagon will be reviewing General Maxwell's entire Strategic Development Division in light of these research priorities. He nodded to Maxwell and left. When the door closed, Maxwell sighed heavily. That went about as well as expected. He's protecting the status quo, Thompson said. He's protecting a lot of powerful interests. Defense contractors, congressional committees, military procurement officers whose careers depend on the current system. Maxwell looked tired. Your project budget is being reviewed. You may lose some resources. James, we're close to something important here. Something that could fundamentally change how we approach military production. I know. That's exactly what scares them. Maxwell stood and walked to the window, looking out at the tank training grounds. Continue your work. I'll hold them off as long as I can, but be prepared for more resistance. As Thompson left the office, he felt the weight of institutional inertia aligning against his small team. They were challenging not just production methods, but an entire ecosystem of military-industrial relationships that had developed over decades. But he also felt more determined than ever. Somewhere in those German locomotive production records lay the key to more efficient, more effective tank manufacturing. If the Soviets had found it, America needed to rediscover it too, before it was too late. Back in their office, Thompson gathered his team. The opposition is mobilizing. We need to accelerate our research. Focus on the Class 52 locomotive, how they simplified the design while maintaining or improving performance, and any connections to tank production techniques. Carter nodded. I've been comparing the design evolution of the Class 52 with German tank development. There are striking parallels, especially in how they streamline production without compromising core performance metrics. Good, dig deeper there. Thompson turned to Wilson. Samuel, I need comprehensive production efficiency comparisons. Man-hours per unit, resource utilization, production ramp-up times, everything you can quantify. Already on it, Colonel. And Robert, keep searching the historical archives. There must be more about the post-war analysis of German production methods. Why were these lessons never fully implemented? Miller looked troubled. Sir, I've found references to a comprehensive study conducted immediately after the war, but the full report is missing from the archives where it should be, almost as if it was deliberately removed. Thompson wasn't surprised. The more they discovered, the more it seemed that someone had worked very hard to bury this knowledge. But why? What was so threatening about German production efficiency that warranted decades of institutional amnesia? The answer came 3 days later, in the form of another unmarked envelope delivered to their office. Inside was a partial copy of the missing report, along with a note. Some of us remember, be careful who you trust. The report, dated November 1945, was a detailed analysis of German tank and locomotive production methods conducted by a joint Army-Navy technical team. Its conclusions were stark and unambiguous. German manufacturing philosophy demonstrated that design simplification for production efficiency, when properly implemented, need not compromise combat effectiveness. Indeed, by focusing engineering resources on critical performance parameters while eliminating unnecessary complexity, both production volume and combat capability can be simultaneously optimized. Most damning was the final recommendation. It is strongly advised that American tank design and production methodologies be fundamentally restructured to incorporate these principles. Failure to do so will result in continued inefficiencies and potential battlefield disadvantages in future conflicts. Yet this recommendation had been ignored. American tank design and production had continued along its established paths, prioritizing technological sophistication and contractor preferences over the lessons learned from German efficiency. Why, Thompson asked aloud, staring at the report, why ignore such clear findings? The answer came from an unexpected source. That evening, as Thompson was leaving Fort Knox, an elderly janitor approached him in the parking lot. "Colonel Thompson, my name is Frank Gehring. I worked in Army Ordnance during and after the war." The man glanced around nervously. "I heard about your project. There's something you should know." Thompson invited him to a nearby diner where, over coffee, "I'll send them." Gehring revealed a piece of the puzzle. After the war, there was a major debate about tank production philosophy, Gehring explained. One faction, led by engineers who had studied the German methods, pushed for a complete overhaul of our approach. Simplified designs, optimized for both production and combat effectiveness. What happened? They lost. The major defense contractors had invested heavily in their existing production methods. Retooling would have been expensive, and many officers were reluctant to admit that German engineering philosophy had been superior. So they buried the findings. Gehring nodded sadly. The official position became that our production methods had won the war, so they must have been correct. The fact that we won through sheer industrial capacity despite our inefficient methods was inconvenient. And the Soviets? They had no such reservations. They captured German engineers, German factories, German documents, and they learned. Their T-54 tank, and now their T-72, show clear influences from German design philosophy. Thompson thanked the old man for his courage in coming forward. As Gehring left, he turned back with one final comment. "Colonel, be careful. There are powerful people who have built entire careers on the system as it exists. They won't appreciate being shown they've been wrong all these years." That night, Thompson couldn't sleep. The pieces were finally fitting together into a coherent picture, but the implications were disturbing. America had willfully ignored valuable lessons that could have made its tanks both more efficient to produce and more effective in combat. And now the Soviets were reaping the benefits of that knowledge, while America remained wedded to inefficient methods protected by institutional pride and contractor interests. As he stared at the ceiling, Thompson thought again of his men who had died in burning Shermans. How many more would die in future conflicts if these lessons remained unlearned? Tomorrow, he would compile everything they had discovered into a comprehensive report for General Maxwell. The institutional resistance would be formidable, but the truth needed to be heard. America's military readiness, and potentially the lives of future tank crews, depended on it. In the darkened room, Thompson made a solemn promise to the ghosts of his past. This time, the lessons would not be buried. This time, the truth would prevail, no matter what it cost him personally. Dawn broke over Fort Knox with a crimson intensity that reminded Thompson of firelight reflecting off tank hulls. He had barely slept, his mind churning with the implications of what they discovered. After a quick shower and a cup of black coffee that tasted like liquid tar, he made his way to their office, arriving before any of his team. The quiet gave him time to reflect on how his life had come full circle. From a young tank commander facing German Panthers with inadequate equipment to a retired colonel, investigating why those inadequacies had existed in the first place. Providence or punishment, he wasn't sure. Thompson laid out the documents they'd gathered on the large central table, creating a chronological narrative of decisions, reports, and deliberate omissions that spanned 3 decades. The picture it painted was damning. When Carter arrived, she found him lost in thought, staring at the array of papers. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Colonel," she said, setting down her briefcase. "Not one ghost. Thousands." Thompson gestured to the documents. Every report buried, every recommendation ignored, every lesson unlearned. Each represents American lives lost unnecessarily. Carter studied the timeline they'd created. It's more than just bureaucratic inertia, isn't it? This was deliberate. Yes, Thompson pointed to several key documents. These recommendations from 1945-46 were explicit. Adopt German production methods. Simplify designs without compromising core performance. Focus engineering resources on critical combat parameters. Yet everyone was rejected or buried. By whom? A coalition of interests. Defense contractors who didn't want to retool their factories. Military procurement officers whose careers were built on existing systems. Politicians with defense plants in their districts. and generals who couldn't admit that German engineering philosophy had merit. Wilson arrived next, carrying fresh data analyses. Colonel, I've completed the efficiency comparisons you requested. The results are even more striking than we thought. He spread charts across the table. German locomotive production efficiency increased by 127% from 1941 to 1944, despite Allied bombing. If we apply similar efficiencies to modern tank production, we could potentially double our output while reducing costs by 30%. Or maintain current production levels while significantly improving quality, Carter added. Miller was the last to arrive, carrying a stack of dusty archive boxes. Found these in deep storage. They were misfiled under agricultural equipment studies of all things. His expression suggested the misfiling hadn't been accidental. Inside were the complete technical analyses of captured German tank factories, along with comparative studies of American production methods. The conclusions matched everything they'd pieced together. German production philosophy had achieved a superior balance of quality and quantity through intelligent design simplification and manufacturing optimization. There's something else, Miller said, pulling out a thin folder. A list of German engineers and production experts who were brought to America under Operation Paperclip. Most went to NASA and got the publicity, but some were quietly placed in defense production roles. What happened to them? Thompson asked. That's the thing. They submitted reports and recommendations throughout the late 1940s, all advocating for the same production philosophy changes. Then around 1950, they disappear from the records. Reassigned, retired, or simply gone. The implications hung heavy in the air. America had deliberately sidelined the very experts who could have transformed its military production philosophy. The Cold War was heating up, Thompson mused. Korea was starting. The military-industrial complex that Eisenhower would later warn about was consolidating its power. And these German experts, with their efficient production methods, threatened established contracts and relationships. So they were silenced, Carter said quietly, and their knowledge buried. Thompson stood up straight, his decision made. Until now. For the next 2 days, they worked tirelessly, compiling everything into a comprehensive report. Thompson insisted on absolute rigor, knowing that any weakness would be exploited by those who wanted to maintain the status quo. The report detailed the history of German locomotive and tank production under wartime conditions, the principles that had allowed for simultaneous efficiency and quality improvements, and the deliberate suppression of these lessons in post-war America. It concluded with a stark assessment of current Soviet production capabilities and the urgent need for reform in American military manufacturing philosophy. On the third morning, as they prepared to present their findings to General Maxwell, they arrived to find their office door ajar. Inside, file cabinets stood open, papers were scattered across the floor, and their research notes were in disarray. Someone's been here, Carter said, surveying the damage. Thompson moved immediately to the safe where they'd been storing their most sensitive findings. It was untouched, its contents secure. They didn't get everything. But why now? Wilson asked. We've been gathering this information for weeks. Because we're ready to present, Thompson said grimly. Someone knows we've assembled the complete picture and wants to stop us before we can share it. As if confirming his suspicion, the phone rang. It was Maxwell's secretary, her voice tense. Colonel Thompson, General Maxwell needs to see you immediately, alone. Thompson found Maxwell in his office with Colonel Blackwood and another man he didn't recognize, a civilian in an expensive suit. Bill, this is Howard Reichman, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Procurement, Maxwell said, his expression carefully neutral. Reichman didn't offer his hand. Colonel Thompson, I understand you've been conducting an investigation into historical production methodologies. That's correct, Mr. Secretary. That investigation is now terminated. All materials are to be turned over to Colonel Blackwood's office for security review. Thompson kept his face impassive. May I ask on whose authority? Mine, Reichman said coldly, with the full support of the Secretary of Defense. Thompson looked at Maxwell, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Play along. I see. May I ask the reason? Your investigation has strayed into areas with significant national security implications, Blackwood interjected. The comparison of American and Soviet production methodologies, particularly as relates to potential battlefield effectiveness, is highly sensitive. Translation: you're making powerful people uncomfortable. All of our work has been conducted under proper security protocols, Thompson replied. Nevertheless, Reichman continued, all materials will be transferred to secure facilities in Washington for appropriate review. Your team is to be disbanded, effective immediately. And if I object? Reichman's smile never reached his eyes. That would be unfortunate for everyone involved. General Maxwell's command, your former team members' careers, your own pension arrangements. The threat was unmistakable. Thompson felt cold anger building inside him, but kept his expression neutral. I'll inform my team. Colonel Blackwood's staff will supervise the transfer of materials, Reichman said. They'll arrive at your office at 1400 hours. After they left, Maxwell sank into his chair. I'm sorry, Bill. This came from the highest levels. They're scared of what we've found. Terrified is more like it. You're threatening billions in contracts and decades of established procurement doctrine. Maxwell leaned forward. What did you find exactly? Thompson gave him the condensed version. Maxwell's expression grew increasingly troubled. So we've been using inefficient production methods for 30 years because contractors and bureaucrats couldn't admit the Germans had a better approach. And now the Soviets are using those same German methods to close the quality gap while maintaining their numerical superiority. Maxwell rubbed his temples. Christ, no wonder Reichman flew down here personally. This could upend the entire defense procurement system. It needs upending. I agree, but they'll bury your report deeper than Jimmy Hoffa. Maxwell glanced at his watch. You have 3 hours before Blackwood's team arrives. Use them wisely. Thompson understood. As he left Maxwell's office, his mind was already racing, formulating a plan. When he returned to their workspace, his team could tell something was wrong. They're shutting us down, he announced without preamble. Blackwood's team will be here at 1400 to confiscate everything. They can't do that, Carter protested. They can and they are. Thompson checked his watch. We have less than 3 hours. To do what? Miller asked. To ensure the truth doesn't get buried again. Thompson's voice was steel. Samuel, take the statistical analyses and production comparison data. Make copies, then find somewhere secure to store the originals. Wilson nodded, immediately gathering the relevant documents. Elizabeth, focus on the technical specifications of the Class 52 locomotive and the parallels to tank design. Those are the core innovations they don't want revealed. What about the historical archives? Miller asked. Too bulky to copy everything. Focus on the key reports that were deliberately buried in the lists of German experts who were sidelined. As his team sprang into action, Thompson turned to their draft final report. It represented weeks of work, a comprehensive analysis that could transform American military production philosophy. It couldn't be allowed to disappear into some Pentagon black hole. He began making a handwritten copy of the most critical conclusions and recommendations, distilling their research into its essential elements. The full report might be lost, but the core findings would survive. The next hours passed in tense activity. Documents were copied, key findings secured, backup records created and distributed to multiple secure locations. They worked with the focused intensity of people who knew the clock was ticking against them. At 13:45, just 15 minutes before Blackwood's team was due to arrive, Thompson gathered his people one last time. Whatever happens next, remember what we discovered here. The truth about German production methods, about Soviet adaptation of those methods, about the deliberate suppression of knowledge that could have saved American lives. That truth matters. What will you do, Colonel? Carter asked. Thompson's expression was grim but determined. What I should have done 30 years ago. Fight for the truth, no matter the cost. At precisely 1400 hours, Colonel Blackwood arrived with 4 military police officers and began the systematic confiscation of all their research materials. Thompson and his team watched in silence as weeks of work were packed into secure containers and removed. But as the MPs carried out the last box, Thompson felt not defeat but resolve. The battle for the future of American tank production was just beginning, and this time he would not retreat. 3 days after the confiscation, Thompson sat alone in his apartment near Fort Knox, surrounded by scattered notes and photocopied documents. The core of their research had been seized, but not all was lost. His team had managed to secure copies of the most critical findings, distributed among themselves for safekeeping. The telephone rang, shattering the pre-dawn silence. Thompson glanced at his watch. 4:37 a.m. Nobody called at this hour with good news. Thompson. His voice was gravel rough from lack of sleep. Bill, it's Maxwell. The general's voice sounded strained. There's been a development. Carter's apartment was broken into last night. Thompson sat upright. Elizabeth, is she all right? Shaken but unharmed. She was working late at the university library when it happened. The place was thoroughly searched. They took her research notes, her personal files, even her dissertation drafts. This isn't a random burglary. No, and there's more. Wilson reported being followed yesterday, 2 men in an unmarked sedan. He managed to lose them, but he's concerned. Thompson processed this information with cold clarity. They're trying to intimidate us. It's working. Miller called me an hour ago, asking to be reassigned. He has a family, Bill. Thompson couldn't blame him. Robert Miller was a historian, not a soldier. He hadn't signed up for this kind of fight. What about you, James? Where do you stand? A long pause followed. I'm being transferred to NATO headquarters in Brussels, effective immediately. The official explanation is that they need my strategic expertise for Warsaw Pact contingency planning. And the unofficial explanation? I'm being put where I can't cause trouble. Maxwell's voice dropped lower. Bill, they're dismantling everything. Our entire research division is being reorganized. Projects reassigned or terminated. Personnel transferred. Thompson absorbed the news grimly. The institutional response was even swifter and more comprehensive than he'd anticipated. What about Reichman and Blackwood? Flying high, Blackwood's been promoted to head a special procurement committee. Reichman's received a commendation for safeguarding critical defense acquisition protocols. Thompson laughed bitterly. They're being rewarded for bearing the truth. That's how the game is played. Maxwell paused again. I managed to delay my departure for 48 hours. If you need anything, now's the time. Thompson considered his options. His military career was long over, so they couldn't threaten him with demotion or court-martial. His pension was secured by law. But they could destroy his reputation, isolate him, ensure that his findings were discredited or simply disappeared. And they were clearly willing to harass and intimidate his team members, people whose careers could still be ruined. I need access to the secure archives one more time, Thompson said finally. There's a document I want to verify before they lock everything down. I can arrange that. Anything else? Thompson thought of the German condensing locomotive, the technology that had given their trains unprecedented range and reduced visibility. There had to be more technical details somewhere. The original technical drawings of the Class 52 condensation's locomotive, the complete engineering schematics, they should be in the captured German technical archives. I'll see what I can do. Maxwell's voice grew urgent. Bill, whatever you're planning, be careful. These people aren't just protecting budgets and contracts anymore. They're protecting reputations, careers, legacies. That makes them dangerous. After hanging up, Thompson opened his journal and began writing. If they came for him next, he wanted a record of everything they'd discovered, everything that had happened. A testament that couldn't be easily dismissed as the ravings of a disgruntled retiree. At 0900, he received a call from Maxwell's aide. Access to the archives had been arranged for 1100 hours. A temporary pass would be waiting at the security desk. Thompson dressed carefully in his civilian clothes, deliberately avoiding anything that might suggest his former military status. Better to attract as little attention as possible. The Fort Knox archives were housed in a nondescript building on the eastern edge of the base. Thompson presented his pass to the guard, signed in, and was escorted to the reading room by a young specialist who seemed utterly uninterested in his presence. Reference materials will be brought to you here, the specialist explained mechanically. Nothing leaves the room. No photography, no unauthorized note-taking. An archivist will supervise at all times. Thompson nodded and took a seat at one of the reading tables. 10 minutes later, an archivist appeared with a cart containing several document boxes. The materials requested by General Maxwell, she said, checking her clipboard. You have clearance for 2 hours. Thompson worked methodically, examining each document, making mental notes of crucial details. The technical drawings of the condensing locomotive were extraordinarily detailed, showing an elegant engineering solution that recaptured exhaust steam, condensed it back to water, and returned it to the boiler system. But it was another document that truly captured his attention. A comprehensive analysis of German tank production efficiency, dated August 1946 and stamped Top Secret Restricted. The report detailed how German tank manufacturers had systematically simplified their designs while improving combat effectiveness, unnecessary components eliminated, assembly sequences optimized, production processes standardized. The results were striking. Production rates increased by over 80%, while unit costs decreased by 35% between 1942 and 1944. Most importantly, the report explicitly refuted the idea that this had come at the expense of quality or combat effectiveness. By focusing engineering resources on critical performance parameters like armor protection, firepower, and mechanical reliability, the Germans had actually improved their tanks' battlefield effectiveness while making them easier and faster to produce. The final section contained the names of the analysis team members. Thompson recognized one immediately, Dr. Klaus Weber, a German production engineer brought to America under Operation Paperclip. The same Klaus Weber who, according to Miller's research, had mysteriously retired in 1950 after repeatedly advocating for the adoption of German production methods. Thompson committed the details to memory, particularly Weber's last known location, Ann Arbor, Michigan, where he had been working as a consultant to Army Ordnance. As his allotted time drew to a close, the archivist approached. "Sir, your session ends in 5 minutes." Thompson nodded, continuing to study the documents until the last possible moment. As he was preparing to leave, the archivist handed him a sealed envelope. "I was instructed to give you this as you departed." Inside was a note from Maxwell. "Weber is alive, retired professor at University of Michigan, 1214 Maple Street, Ann Arbor. Go carefully." 2 days later, Thompson stood on the porch of a modest brick house in a quiet Ann Arbor neighborhood. The garden was immaculate, with precise rows of tulips and daffodils lining the walkway. German precision applied to horticulture. He rang the doorbell and waited. Footsteps approached slowly, and the door opened to reveal an elderly man with silver hair and alert blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Though in his 80s, he stood perfectly straight, his bearing unmistakably European. "Professor Weber, my name is William Thompson. I was hoping to speak with you about your work after the war." Weber studied him carefully. "The tank commander. I recognize your name from the reports." His accent was still noticeably German, despite decades in America. "I wondered if someone would eventually come asking questions. Please come in." The interior of Weber's home was as precise as his garden. Books lined the walls, technical journals were stacked neatly on side tables, and engineering drawings were framed like artwork. "Coffee?" Weber asked, leading Thompson to a sunlit sitting room. "Please." As Weber prepared the coffee in the kitchen, Thompson examined the framed certificates and photographs on the wall. Weber receiving an engineering award in 1938. Weber standing beside what appeared to be a Panther tank production line. Weber in American uniform after the war, consulting with American officers. "My past is not hidden," Weber said, returning with a tray, "but it is seldom discussed." The coffee was strong and black, served in delicate porcelain cups that seemed incongruous with the engineer's practical nature. "Professor, I've been investigating German production methods during the war, particularly for locomotives and tanks. Your name appeared on several reports recommending that America adopt similar approaches." Weber's eyes narrowed slightly. "Those reports were classified. How did you gain access?" "I had authorization, temporarily." Thompson sipped his coffee. "What happened to those recommendations, Professor? Why weren't they implemented?" Weber set down his cup with deliberate care. "You are asking questions that ended my government career, Colonel Thompson. Questions that were deemed unpatriotic. I'm not here to judge or accuse, I'm trying to understand." Weber seemed to measure Thompson, weighing his sincerity. Finally, he stood. "Come with me." He led Thompson to a back room that had been converted into a home office. One wall was dominated by technical drawings of various tanks, German Panthers and Tigers, American Shermans and Pattons, Soviet T-34s and T-54s. "I have spent my life studying efficient design for production," Weber explained. "In Germany, during the war, we faced a challenge: how to build sophisticated weapons with limited resources under constant bombing. We were forced to innovate, to find ways to simplify without compromising effectiveness." He pointed to a drawing of the Panther tank. "When first introduced, the Panther required approximately 55,000 man-hours to produce. By 1944, we had reduced this to under 30,000, while simultaneously improving its reliability and combat effectiveness." "How?" "Designed for manufacturing, every component evaluated not just for its function, but for its production efficiency. Unnecessary complexity eliminated. Assembly sequences optimized. Worker skills matched to tasks." Weber's eyes lit with professional pride. It was engineering at its purest. Form following function, with production itself considered a primary function. "And after the war, you brought this knowledge to America." Weber's expression darkened. I was brought to America to share this knowledge. Yes, for the first few years I worked enthusiastically with Army ordnance, analyzing German production methods and recommending improvements to American tank manufacturing. What changed? Politics, economics, ego. Weber shrugged, a quintessentially European gesture. My recommendations required fundamental changes to how tanks were designed and produced. This threatened established contracts, manufacturing facilities, careers. When I persisted, I was labeled difficult. Eventually, I was told my expertise was no longer required. They silenced you. They offered me a choice. Stop advocating for change and accept a comfortable academic position, or face deportation as an uncooperative foreign national. I had built a life here, a family. I chose silence. Thompson felt a familiar anger building. But your methods worked. The evidence was clear. Evidence matters little when it contradicts vested interests. Weber pulled a folder from his desk drawer. I kept copies of my final reports, against regulations, but I suspected they might otherwise disappear entirely. Perhaps you will find them useful. Thompson accepted the folder, understanding its significance. The Soviets adopted your methods, didn't they? Weber nodded. They were less encumbered by existing industrial infrastructure or corporate relationships. They studied captured German factories, documents, and engineers with singular focus. Their T-54 tank and subsequent designs show clear influence of our production philosophy. And now they're applying those same principles to their T-72. Yes, I have followed the open-source technical literature. The T-72 is a masterpiece of simplified design for efficient production. Not as technologically sophisticated as your M60 perhaps, but more than adequate for its role and producible in vast numbers. Weber fixed Thompson with a penetrating stare. You understand the implications, I think. Thompson did. In any extended conflict, Soviet production capacity would overwhelm American manufacturing, just as American capacity had eventually overwhelmed German production in World War II. But this time, the quality gap might not be sufficient to offset the numerical disadvantage. Why are you helping me, Professor? After all these years of silence. Weber walked to the window, looking out at his carefully tended garden. I am an old man, Colonel. I have lived with compromise for 30 years. Perhaps it is time for the truth to emerge. He turned back to Thompson. What will you do with this information? Try to ensure it isn't buried again. Weber nodded, seemingly satisfied. Then I wish you better luck than I had. As Thompson prepared to leave, Weber offered one final observation. The Soviets understood something fundamental about our approach. It was never about cutting corners or sacrificing quality for quantity. It was about intelligent simplification, focusing resources where they truly mattered for battlefield effectiveness, eliminating complexity that added cost but not value. He clasped Thompson's hand firmly. America has never fully understood this lesson. Perhaps now is the time. Driving back to his hotel, Thompson felt both vindicated and burdened by Weber's confirmation. The elderly engineer had provided the missing piece, direct testimony from someone who had witnessed both the development of German production methods and their suppression in post-war America. But what to do with this knowledge? The institutional resistance had already shown itself to be formidable, willing to use intimidation and bureaucratic power to silence dissent. Thompson needed allies, and he needed a platform that couldn't be easily suppressed. That evening, he called Elizabeth Carter from a payphone, minimizing the chance of the call being monitored. Elizabeth, it's Bill Thompson. Don't use my name if anyone is with you. I'm alone. Her voice was tense. They took everything, Colonel. All my research, my personal notes, even my graduate work on production systems. I know, I'm sorry you've been caught in this, but I've found something important. I need to meet with you and Wilson, somewhere secure. They arranged to meet the following day at a public library in Lexington, a neutral location where they were unlikely to be recognized or overheard. When Thompson arrived, Carter and Wilson were already there, seated at a table in the reference section. Both looked tired and on edge. Thank you for coming, Thompson said, keeping his voice low. I know the risks you're taking. Wilson glanced around nervously. I've been followed twice more. Nothing obvious, just men in suits who happen to show up wherever I go. My department chair called me in yesterday, Carter added. Asked about my extracurricular research activities. Said the university values its relationship with the Defense Department. It was a warning, barely veiled. Thompson nodded grimly. They're trying to isolate us, pressure us into dropping this entirely. He placed Weber's folder on the table. But what we found matters too much to let it go. He explained his meeting with Weber, the confirmation of their theories about German production methods and their deliberate suppression in post-war America. This validates everything we discovered, Carter said, examining Weber's reports. The technical approaches, the efficiency improvements, the applicability to modern manufacturing, and confirms that the Soviets have adopted these methods for their tank production, Wilson added, just as we suspected. The question is what to do now, Thompson said. The normal channels have been closed to us. Maxwell has been transferred. Our research confiscated. They're watching all of us. Carter leaned forward. I have a contact at the Congressional Research Service, someone I trust. They provide nonpartisan analysis to Congress, including the Armed Services Committee. Would they be willing to review our findings, Thompson asked. Possibly, especially if we frame it as a matter of national security rather than bureaucratic malfeasance. Wilson looked uncertain. Even if they agree to review our research, we'd need to reconstruct much of what was taken. I have Weber's original reports and the key points from our investigation, Thompson replied. Between that and what copies we managed to secure before the confiscation, we can rebuild the essential findings. It would take time, Carter warned. Weeks, at least. Then we'd better get it started. Thompson's resolve was iron. We work separately to avoid drawing attention. Share information only when necessary using secure means. No phones, no offices, no university facilities. The next weeks fell into a grinding rhythm. Thompson worked from his apartment, reconstructing their research using Weber's reports and his own notes. Carter and Wilson contributed what they could while maintaining their normal routines to avoid suspicion. The work was painstaking, made more difficult by the need for secrecy and the constant awareness of surveillance. Thompson found himself checking for followers, varying his routine, using public phones rather than his home line. 3 weeks into their clandestine effort, the first serious warning came. Thompson returned to his apartment one evening to find the door slightly ajar. Inside, nothing seemed overtly disturbed, but he sensed the intrusion. Small things out of place, papers too neatly stacked, the lingering scent of unfamiliar cologne. They had searched his home, expertly enough that most people wouldn't have noticed. Thompson immediately gathered his research materials and relocated them to a storage locker he'd rented under a false name. The next day, he received a phone call from an unidentified man with a bureaucratic voice. Colonel Thompson, this call's a courtesy. Your continued investigation into classified defense procurement methodologies has been noted. Such activities could be construed as a violation of national security protocols. Who is this? Thompson demanded. A concerned party. We suggest you focus on enjoying your retirement. Further pursuit of your current activities could have unfortunate consequences for everyone involved. The line went dead before Thompson could respond. The message was clear. Back off or face escalating consequences. Rather than intimidating him, the threat crystallized Thompson's determination. He had faced German tanks with inadequate equipment. He wouldn't be cowed by bureaucratic bullies, but he worried about Carter and Wilson, whose careers and futures were more vulnerable. He called Carter from a payphone near the bus station. Elizabeth, they're stepping up the pressure. I received a direct warning today. So did I, she replied, her voice tight. My tenure review has suddenly been accelerated. The committee chairman mentioned concerns about my focus and commitment to academic priorities. And Wilson? Worse, his security clearance is being reviewed. Without it, he can't continue his work at the Research Institute. Thompson absorbed this grimly. They're targeting your livelihoods, I'm sorry. It's not your fault, Colonel. We knew the risks. Carter paused. My contact at the Congressional Research Service is willing to meet, but only with you directly. No documents sent ahead, no names provided. When and where? Tomorrow. Washington, the Lincoln Memorial, East Steps, 1400 hours. He'll be wearing a blue windbreaker and carrying a copy of the Washington Post. I'll be there. Thompson took precautions for the trip to Washington, paying cash for his bus ticket, traveling under an assumed name, watching for followers. The capital was humid and overcast when he arrived, threatening rain that never quite materialized. He approached the Lincoln Memorial from the reflecting poolside, scanning for surveillance. The East Steps were crowded with tourists, but he quickly spotted a middle-aged man in a blue windbreaker, newspaper folded under his arm, standing slightly apart from the main groups. Thompson approached casually. Impressive view from here. The man glanced at him. Better on a clear day. You can see all the way to the Capitol. He offered his hand. John Merrick. Bill Thompson. Merrick gestured away from the crowds. Let's walk. They moved along the mall, maintaining a steady pace that made eavesdropping difficult. Merrick was cautious, checking periodically for followers, keeping their conversation general until he was satisfied they weren't being monitored. Dr. Carter indicated you have information regarding Soviet tank production methods and their historical connection to German manufacturing techniques. That's part of it, Thompson confirmed, but the more concerning aspect is the deliberate suppression of similar production improvements in American tank manufacturing. Merrick raised an eyebrow. Suppression by whom? A coalition of defense contractors, procurement officials, and military leaders who've built careers and fortunes on the existing system. They've actively buried research and sidelined experts who advocated for more efficient production methods. Those are serious allegations, Colonel, with substantial evidence to support them. They stopped at a bench overlooking the tidal basin. Merrick seemed to be weighing his next words carefully. The Congressional Research Service provides nonpartisan analysis to lawmakers. We don't take political positions or make policy recommendations. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to review our findings and present the factual information to the Armed Services Committee. What they do with it is their decision. Merrick considered this. What exactly is the national security implication you're suggesting? The Soviets have adopted German production methods that allow them to build tanks more efficiently without sacrificing quality. They're closing the technological gap while maintaining their numerical advantage. Meanwhile, America continues to use inefficient production methods that maximize cost and complexity rather than combat effectiveness. Thompson met Merrick's gaze directly. In any extended conflict, this disparity could be decisive. And you have documentation to support these claims? Yes, including original reports from German engineers brought to America after the war, whose recommendations were systematically ignored. Merrick was silent for a long moment. I can review your materials. If I find them credible, I can prepare a briefing for selected committee members. But I must be clear, I can only present factual findings, not advocate for specific policy changes. That's all I'm asking. The facts speak for themselves. They arranged a secure method for Thompson to provide the reconstructed research, using a series of dead drops rather than direct handovers that might be observed. As they prepared to part ways, Merrick offered a final observation. You should know, Colonel, that several defense contractors with major tank production contracts have significantly increased their lobbying activities recently, particularly with members of the Armed Services Committee. They know we're coming. It appears so. Be careful. These companies have billions at stake and friends in very high places. I've faced worse odds. Merrick smiled thinly. Perhaps, but tanks come at you directly. Bureaucrats and corporate interests are more insidious. Over the next 2 weeks, Thompson carefully transferred their reconstructed research to Merrick using the agreed-upon methods. Dead drops at public locations, materials disguised as ordinary documents, never the same place twice. It was like something from a spy novel, but the stakes justified the precautions. Meanwhile, the pressure on his team continued to mount. Wilson's security clearance review had expanded to include allegations of unauthorized access to classified materials. Carter had been called before her university's ethics committee regarding concerns about outside activities conflicting with academic responsibilities. They were being systematically isolated and discredited, their professional reputations under attack. Thompson, with no career left to threaten, became the primary conduit for their findings, the focal point for their increasingly desperate effort to bring the truth to light. Then came the most disturbing development yet. Returning from a meeting with Carter, Thompson found his apartment door broken open. Inside, the place had been ransacked. Drawers emptied, furniture upended, even the walls damaged where pictures had been torn down to check behind them. This was no careful search by professionals. This was intimidation, meant to be seen and recognized as a threat. And on his kitchen table lay a single bullet, a crude but unmistakable message. Thompson called Carter and Wilson from a payphone, warning them of the escalation and urging caution. Then he checked into a motel under a false name, unwilling to remain in an apartment that hostile forces had so clearly identified. That night, as he sat in the anonymous motel room reviewing their latest findings, Thompson received a call from an unexpected source. Colonel Thompson, this is Frank Gehring. We spoke about German tank production methods. The elderly, former ordnance officer sounded agitated, his voice tight with stress. Mr. Gehring, what can I do for you? They came to see me today. 2 men. They didn't identify themselves, but they asked very specific questions about our conversation, about what I told you regarding the suppression of German production methods after the war. Thompson felt a chill. Did they threaten you? Not explicitly, but the message was clear. They know I spoke to you. They know what I said. And they wanted me to understand that continuing to assist you would be problematic. I'm sorry you've been dragged into this, Frank. That's not why I'm calling. Gehring's voice dropped lower. Before they left, one of them mentioned something. He said Thompson should worry more about his German friend than about ancient history. I think they were referring to Dr. Weber. Thompson sat upright, instantly alert. Thank you for telling me. I'll handle it. After hanging up, Thompson immediately called Weber's home in Ann Arbor. No answer. He tried again, letting it ring longer. Still nothing. It was nearly midnight, but Weber was an elderly man who might sleep soundly. Or something might be wrong. Thompson spent a restless night weighing his options. At first light, he called again. When there was still no answer, he made his decision. He checked out of the motel and began the drive to Ann Arbor, a sense of foreboding growing with each mile. Weber's neighborhood looked exactly as it had before, peaceful and well kept in the morning light. But as Thompson approached the house, he noticed subtle differences. The curtains were drawn. The meticulously maintained garden showed signs of neglect, with fallen leaves unraked and flowers untrimmed. He rang the doorbell and waited, no response. He knocked firmly, then called out, "Professor Weber, it's William Thompson." The silence was oppressive. Thompson moved to a window and peered through a gap in the curtains. The interior was dark, but he could make out overturned furniture and scattered papers. Signs of a struggle or a search, possibly both. Thompson tried the door, locked. Moving to the back of the house, he found a kitchen window unlatched. He hesitated only briefly before pushing it open and climbing through. The interior confirmed his fears. The house had been thoroughly searched, with a violence that suggested anger rather than professional thoroughness. Books had been pulled from shelves, furniture upended, pictures smashed. "Professor Weber?" Thompson moved carefully through the house, checking each room. There was no sign of the elderly engineer. In Weber's office, the destruction was even more complete. Technical drawings had been torn from the walls, filing cabinets emptied onto the floor, desk drawers removed entirely. They had been looking for something specific, Thompson realized. Weber's research, his documentation of German production methods. On the desk, partially covered by scattered papers, lay Weber's address book. Thompson flipped through it quickly, finding entries for family members. A son in Chicago, a daughter in Boston. He pocketed the book, knowing he needed to check on their safety as well. As he prepared to leave, Thompson spotted something odd. A corner of the carpet in Weber's office had been disturbed, pulled back slightly from the wall. Curious, he lifted the carpet further, revealing a small safe embedded in the floor. The safe was unlocked, its contents removed, but beside it, as if dropped in haste, lay a single microfilm canister. Thompson picked it up, turning it over to read the handwritten label. Condensations Technology, Vollständige Documentation, Condensing Technology, Complete Documentation. Thompson pocketed the microfilm and carefully made his way out of the house, alert for any sign of surveillance. His mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Weber was missing, his house searched, and someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to find and remove his technical documentation. From a payphone at a nearby gas station, Thompson called Weber's son in Chicago. The conversation confirmed his worst fears. "My father is in the hospital," Michael Weber explained, his voice tight with worry. "He suffered a supposed break-in at his home 3 days ago. The police found him unconscious on his office floor. The doctors say it was a heart attack, but he had injuries consistent with an assault. Is he conscious? Can he speak? He's stable but heavily sedated. The doctors aren't sure if there's been neurological damage from oxygen deprivation." Michael's voice hardened. "Who are you exactly? Why are you asking about my father?" "I'm a colleague. Your father was helping me with some historical research into German production methods during World War II. A long pause followed. "The men who did this, they were looking for his research, weren't they? His old technical documents from Germany." "I believe so, yes. My father warned us this might happen years ago when he was first silenced by the government. He said the truth was too valuable, too threatening to certain interests." Michael's voice broke slightly. "Is it worth it? This research? Is it worth what's happened to him?" Thompson thought of the missing German engineers, the buried reports, the decades of deliberately ignored efficiency improvements, the thousands of American lives that might be lost in any future conflict because of inferior equipment or insufficient production capacity. Your father believed it was? He saw this research as his legacy, a chance to finally bring the truth to light. Then find who did this to him. It was not a request but a demand. Make them pay. After hanging up, Thompson sat in his car, weighing his next move. Weber had been attacked, his research stolen. The message was unmistakable. The people opposing them were willing to resort to violence to protect their interests. Yet they had missed something. The microfilm Thompson now possessed might contain the detailed technical documentation of the German condensing system, the revolutionary technology that had given their locomotives unprecedented range and reduced detectability. Technology that could potentially be adapted to modern tanks, addressing one of their most significant limitations. Thompson needed to view the microfilm's contents, but he couldn't risk using public facilities where he might be observed. He needed allies with resources, people who could protect both him and the vital information he now possessed. His thoughts turned to an old friend, someone he hadn't contacted in years, but who might have both the means and the motivation to help. Colonel James Harrigan, former tank commander, now working for the Office of Naval Research. Harrigan had lost men in Sherman tanks just as Thompson had, and he had always been outspoken about the need for better equipment. From another payphone, Thompson placed the call. After brief pleasantries and establishing that the connection was secure, he explained the situation in concise terms. Jim, I've uncovered evidence that German production methods from World War II, which could have significantly improved American tank manufacturing, were deliberately suppressed after the war. The Soviets adopted these methods for their tanks, while we continued with inefficient approaches that maximize cost over combat effectiveness. Harrigan's response was measured. That's a significant claim, Bill. I have documentation, including original reports from German engineers brought to America after the war. One of those engineers was just assaulted, his research stolen. A long pause followed. This isn't a secure topic for an open line. Where are you now? Ann Arbor, Michigan. Can you get to Chicago? I have connections there, people who can provide security while we talk. Thompson agreed, arranging to meet Harrigan the following day at a naval research facility on Lake Michigan. Before ending the call, Harrigan offered a final warning. Be careful, Bill. If what you're saying is true, you're threatening some very powerful interests. The military-industrial complex Eisenhower warned about isn't just a concept. It's real, it's entrenched, and it plays hardball. I've noticed. Watch for followers. Vary your route. Don't use credit cards or stay in hotels where you need to show ID. Thompson recognized the precautions of a man familiar with clandestine operations. You sound like you've done this before. Let's just say I've made my own powerful enemies over the years. Questioning established procurement practices isn't a career-enhancing move in today's military. Harrigan's voice hardened. But some things matter more than careers. Thompson drove through the night, taking indirect routes, stopping frequently to check for tails, paying cash for gas and food. By dawn, he had reached the outskirts of Chicago, exhausted but vigilant. He found a quiet diner and ordered breakfast, using the time to organize his thoughts and review the documents he'd managed to preserve. The technical data they'd assembled painted a clear picture. German production philosophy had achieved an optimal balance of efficiency and effectiveness, a balance that America had ignored in favor of complexity and cost, while the Soviets had embraced it to enhance their already formidable numerical advantage. As he sipped his coffee, Thompson noticed a black sedan pulling into the diner parking lot. Two men in dark suits emerged, scanning the area with the practiced eyes of professionals. Thompson tensed, calculating his options. The diner's rear exit was visible from his booth, a clear path to his car parked behind the building. The men entered, immediately spotting him despite the early hour and near-empty diner. The taller man approached, his partner hanging back near the door, blocking the main exit. Colonel Thompson, we need to speak with you regarding a matter of national security. Thompson kept his voice level. Identification, please. The man produced a leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal a government ID. Special Agent Curtis, Defense Investigative Service. My partner is Special Agent Wolcott. What can I do for the DS at 6 in the morning in a Chicago diner? We need you to come with us to discuss your recent activities regarding classified defense procurement methodologies. Thompson noted the specific phrasing, identical to the warning call he'd received earlier. I don't believe I'll be doing that, gentlemen. Curtis's expression hardened. This isn't a request, Colonel. You're in possession of classified materials removed without authorization from secure facilities. I don't have any classified materials. I have historical research and personal testimony regarding production methods that should have been implemented decades ago. Nevertheless, you need to come with us. Curtis moved his jacket slightly, revealing a shoulder holster. The message was clear. Thompson weighed his options. Direct confrontation would be foolish. These men were armed and had legal authority, however questionably they might be applying it. But surrendering meant losing the microfilm and potentially disappearing into some bureaucratic black hole. His decision was made for him when the diner's cook, a burly man with tattoos visible beneath his white apron, emerged from the kitchen with a shotgun. "Everything okay out here? These fellas bothering you, mister?" Curtis turned, startled by the interruption. "Sir, this is government business. Please return to the kitchen." The cook pumped the shotgun, the sound echoing in the quiet diner. "Don't look like government business to me. Looks like two guys harassing one of my customers." "We're federal agents," Wolcott said from the door, his hand moving toward his own weapon. "And this is my diner," the cook replied. "Unless you've got a warrant, you're just two guys causing trouble." The standoff stretched for a tense moment. Thompson remained still, aware that any sudden movement could escalate the situation dangerously. Finally, Curtis stepped back. "This isn't over, Colonel. We'll be waiting." After they left, Thompson thanked the cook, paid his bill with a generous tip, and slipped out the back door. He abandoned his car, knowing it would be watched, and called a taxi from a nearby hotel. By mid-morning, he had reached the Naval Research Facility where Harrigan waited. Security was tight, but his name was on the visitor list, and he was escorted directly to a secure conference room. Harrigan was older than Thompson remembered. His once red hair now gray, his face more lined. But his handshake was firm, his eyes alert and intelligent. "You look like hell, Bill. It's been a rough few weeks." Once they were alone, Thompson laid out everything. Their initial research into German locomotive production, the discovery of systematically suppressed efficiency improvements, Weber's confirmation and subsequent assault, and the microfilm he'd recovered. Harrigan listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grim. When Thompson finished, he sat back considering. "You realize what you're suggesting, that for 30 years defense contractors, procurement officials, and senior military leaders have deliberately ignored production methods that could have made our tanks both more effective and less expensive. The evidence supports it. The question is why? Simple bureaucratic resistance to change doesn't explain this level of active suppression." Thompson had considered this. Follow the money. The current system maximizes cost and complexity. More expensive tanks mean bigger contracts. More complex tanks mean more specialized support equipment, more spare parts, more maintenance contracts. An entire ecosystem of profitable inefficiency, Harrigan nodded, and career advancement for the procurement officers and military leaders who support it. Meanwhile, the Soviets have adopted the very methods we ignored, allowing them to produce formidable tanks in vast numbers. Harrigan stood, moving to a secure cabinet in the corner of the room. He returned with a microfilm reader. "Let's see what your German friend thought was worth hiding." The microfilm contained complete technical specifications for the German condensing locomotive system, including detailed engineering drawings, material specifications, and performance data. But it also contained something unexpected, a proposal for adapting the same technology to tank engines, dated 1944 but never implemented due to Germany's collapsing war effort. "This is remarkable," Harrigan said, studying the drawings. "The Germans were developing a closed-cycle cooling system for tank engines that would have significantly reduced their thermal signature and extended their operational range. Exactly the advantages their condensing locomotives provided," Thompson noted, "and exactly what our current tanks lack. The M60's range is limited by its fuel consumption, and its thermal signature makes it highly visible to modern infrared detection systems." They spent hours reviewing the technical data, with Harrigan bringing in trusted engineers from the research facility to provide additional analysis. The consensus was clear. The German technology, updated with modern materials and engineering techniques, could provide significant advantages for American tanks. "This isn't just about historical production methods anymore," Harrigan said as they concluded their review. "This is about current technology with immediate military applications, which makes it even more valuable," Thompson replied, "and explains the extraordinary efforts to suppress it. The question is, What do we do now? The forces aligned against you are clearly willing to use both institutional power and direct intimidation to keep this quiet. Thompson considered their options. Merrick at the Congressional Research Service is reviewing our findings on the production methods, but this technical data on the condensing system needs to reach people who can actually implement it. Harrigan nodded thoughtfully. I have contacts at DARPA who might be interested. Scientists and engineers who care more about technological advancement than protecting established contracts. Can they provide protection as well as technical expertise? Because after today's encounter, I'm convinced these people won't stop until they've silenced everyone involved and buried all the evidence. They'll try, but their power isn't absolute. Harrigan's expression hardened, and they've made a critical mistake. What's that? They've attacked one of our own. Weber was a civilian, but he was under American protection as part of Operation Paperclip. Assaulting him crosses a line that even the most powerful defense contractors can't ignore. Thompson saw the logic, so we use Weber's assault as leverage? Exactly. We make it clear that we have evidence linking his attack to the suppression of his research. We don't have to prove it definitively. Just create enough concern that an investigation becomes unavoidable. It was a strategy built on brinkmanship, using the threat of exposure to create space for their actual goal, bringing the suppressed production methods and technical innovations into the light, where they could benefit American tank design and manufacturing. As they finalized their plans, Thompson felt a weight lifting. After weeks of isolated struggle, of watching his team be systematically attacked and intimidated, he finally had powerful allies and a viable path forward. But he also recognized the dangers ahead. The forces they were challenging wouldn't surrender easily. The confrontation at the diner had demonstrated their willingness to use increasingly direct methods, and Thompson had no illusions about the resources at their disposal. The battle for the future of American tank production was entering its most dangerous phase. The truth was emerging, but whether it would prevail remained uncertain. That night, as Thompson prepared to leave for Washington, where Harrigan had arranged secure accommodation, his old friend offered a final observation. You know what's ironic about all this, Bill? The very people suppressing these innovations claim to be protecting America's military superiority, but they're actually undermining it, putting profit and bureaucratic comfort above combat effectiveness. That's always been the problem, Thompson replied. They've forgotten that the purpose of a tank isn't to generate contracts or advance careers. It's to fight and win battles while keeping its crew alive. A lesson written in the blood of men like those you lost in 1945. Thompson nodded grimly, and one I intend to ensure is never forgotten again. Washington, D.C. greeted Thompson with a perfect spring morning, the kind that tourists dream about when planning their visits to the capital. Cherry blossoms lined the tidal basin in full bloom, and the Washington Monument stood crisp against a cloudless blue sky. A beautiful day for a confrontation with power. He checked into the safe house Harrigan had arranged, a nondescript brownstone in Georgetown, owned by a retired naval intelligence officer. The location provided both security and proximity to the centers of power Thompson needed to access. "Make yourself at home," said Commander Alan Pearson, a lean man with steel gray hair and the watchful eyes of someone who had spent decades in the shadows. "The place is secure, no electronic surveillance possible. Phone line is clean." Thompson set his small bag on the guest room bed. "I appreciate the risk you're taking." Pearson smiled thinly. "Jim Harrigan saved my life in Korea. When he calls, I answer." He handed Thompson a set of keys. "There's a car in the garage. Clean registration, nothing that connects to you or me. Use it if needed, but remember you might be followed." After Pearson left, Thompson unpacked the materials he had brought: Weber's documentation, the microfilm of the condensing system, and their reconstructed research on German production methods. Spread across the desk, they represented the culmination of weeks of investigation and decades of suppressed knowledge. He called Merrick at the secure number provided. "I'm in Washington," Thompson said when the analyst answered. "Have you reviewed our materials?" "Yes." Merrick's voice was cautious, even on the secure line. "Your findings are compelling. I've prepared a preliminary report for the Armed Services Committee." "When will they see it?" That's the complication. Congressman Phillips, the committee chair, has suddenly rescheduled all briefings. Apparently, there's an urgent appropriations matter requiring the committee's full attention. Thompson recognized the delaying tactic. "Let me guess, a new tank procurement package?" "How did you know?" The surprise in Merrick's voice was genuine. Because they're trying to push it through before our information becomes public. Thompson felt a cold certainty. Who's the primary contractor? Dynamo Defense Systems. They're proposing a modified M60 with enhanced electronics, but the same basic design and manufacturing approach. The contract is valued at $8 billion over 5 years. The pieces fell into place. Dynamo was the largest tank manufacturer in the United States, with production facilities in a dozen congressional districts. They had built their empire on the inefficient but profitable manufacturing methods Thompson was challenging. Is there any way to get our information to the committee before they vote on this appropriation? Merrick hesitated. Officially, no, but there's a subcommittee hearing tomorrow morning on long-term defense procurement strategies. Less attended, but still on the record. I could provide your materials to Representative Eleanor Carson. She's been asking pointed questions about defense contracting efficiency. Do it, and tell her I'm willing to testify if needed. That evening, Thompson received a call from Harrigan. I've spoken with my contacts at DARPA, he said without preamble. They want to see Weber's condensing system designs. This kind of technology is exactly what they're looking for to address the range and thermal signature limitations of our current tanks. Can they protect the information and Weber? Better than that, they're opening a formal investigation into Weber's assault. As a former Operation Paperclip asset, he falls under certain protective protocols that were never rescinded. The investigation gives us legitimate cover to preserve and study his technical documentation as potential evidence. Thompson felt the first genuine optimism in weeks. That's excellent news. What about his current medical situation? DARPA is arranging transfer to Walter Reed under military protection. No one will get to him there. The pieces were falling into place. With DARPA interested in the condensing technology and the Congressional Research Service preparing to brief key representatives, they had the beginnings of institutional support. But Thompson knew better than to underestimate their opponents. I'll need to testify about the production methods, he told Harrigan. The condensing technology is important, but the systemic suppression of efficient manufacturing is the bigger issue. Agreed, but be careful. Going public makes you an even bigger target. The warning proved prophetic. The next morning's Washington Post contained a small item in the military affairs section. Former Army officer investigated for unauthorized possession of classified materials. The article didn't name Thompson directly, but described a retired colonel who had allegedly removed sensitive documents related to defense procurement. The message was clear. They were preparing the groundwork to discredit him publicly if he came forward. Thompson arrived at the Rayburn House office building 30 minutes before the subcommittee hearing was scheduled to begin. Security was tight, with visitors passing through metal detectors and having their belongings x-rayed. Thompson had brought only his personal identification and a small notebook. Merrick met him in the lobby, looking nervous. There's been a development, he said, leading Thompson to a quiet corner. Representative Carson has been called away on a family emergency. She was the only member I had briefed on your findings. Convenient timing, Thompson observed. That's not all. The hearing agenda has been modified. They've added testimony from General Lawrence Harding, Chief of Army Procurement. Thompson recognized the name immediately. Harding had been a major player in tank acquisition programs for 15 years, a staunch defender of the status quo and close ally of defense contractors. They're circling the wagons, Merrick nodded grimly. I can still distribute your materials to subcommittee members, but without Carson to raise the issues, they may not receive much attention. Then I need to testify. Thompson's resolve hardened. Can you get me on the witness list? Possibly, as a recognized expert on tank warfare and production, but it would be highly unusual without advance notice. Make it happen. Otherwise, this whole trip has been for nothing. When the hearing began, Thompson sat in the back of the committee room, watching the proceedings with a veteran's patience. The initial witnesses were predictable: a Defense Department budget analyst discussing procurement timelines, a Dynamo Defense Systems executive highlighting job creation from the new contract, a retired general now working as a defense consultant praising the proposed M60 modifications. General Harding's testimony was last and the most polished. A tall man with perfect posture and a chest full of ribbons, he presented an imposing figure as he addressed the subcommittee. The proposed procurement package represents the most cost-effective approach to maintaining America's armored superiority in the face of growing Soviet capabilities, he stated confidently. While the Soviets may produce more tanks, our qualitative edge remains decisive. The subcommittee members nodded appreciatively, particularly those representing districts with dynamo facilities. The chairman was preparing to conclude the hearing when Merrick approached him, speaking quietly and handing him a folder. The chairman looked surprised, then annoyed, but finally nodded. "It appears we have one additional witness," he announced. "Colonel William Thompson, U.S. Army, retired. Colonel Thompson has requested time to address issues directly relevant to our procurement discussions." As Thompson made his way to the witness table, he felt every eye in the room on him. He had testified before congressional committees during his active service, but never under such adversarial conditions. "Colonel Thompson," the chairman began, his tone making clear his displeasure at the interruption, "the committee understands you have information pertinent to our deliberations on tank procurement strategies. Please be brief, as we have already extended beyond our scheduled time." "Thank you, Mr. Chairman." Thompson's voice was steady, carrying the natural authority of a commander who had led men in combat. "I appear before you today to present evidence of a systematic suppression of information that directly impacts America's tank production capabilities and battlefield effectiveness." The room grew quieter, staffers looking up from their notes with newfound interest. "For the past several weeks, I have been conducting research into German tank and locomotive production methods from World War II and their potential application to modern manufacturing. What I discovered was disturbing. Documented evidence that after the war, America deliberately ignored manufacturing innovations that could have dramatically improved both the production efficiency and combat effectiveness of our tanks. Thompson laid out the core findings concisely. The German production philosophy that balanced efficiency and effectiveness, the documented improvements in both output and quality, and the clear parallels to Soviet adoption of similar methods in their current T-72 tanks. Most concerning, he continued, when German engineers brought to America under Operation Paperclip attempted to implement these methods, they were systematically silenced. Their recommendations were buried, their reports classified, and their expertise sidelined in favor of maintaining inefficient but profitable production systems. At the back of the room, Thompson noticed several men in dark suits enter and take positions near the doors. Among them was Special Agent Curtis from the Chicago diner confrontation. They had found him. Undeterred, Thompson pressed on. "The result is that today, 30 years later, America continues to produce tanks using manufacturing philosophies that maximize cost and complexity rather than combat effectiveness. Meanwhile, the Soviets have embraced the very German efficiency methods we ignored, allowing them to produce formidable T-72 tanks in numbers that would overwhelm our forces in any extended conflict." General Harding shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Several committee members were now paying close attention, their expressions troubled by Thompson's allegations. "Do you have documentation supporting these claims, Colonel?" asked Representative Martinez, a former Marine known for his skepticism of bloated defense contracts. "Yes, sir. The Congressional Research Service has received my complete findings, including original reports from German engineers and comparative analyses of production methodologies." Martinez looked to Merrick, who nodded confirmation. "And why is this relevant to our current procurement discussions?" the chairman asked, clearly hoping to minimize the impact of Thompson's testimony. "Because the contract under consideration perpetuates exactly the inefficient manufacturing approaches I've described. It commits billions of taxpayer dollars to tanks that cost too much, take too long to produce, and fail to incorporate lessons we should have learned 3 decades ago." Thompson met the chairman's gaze directly. "America deserves better tanks, built better, at lower cost. The knowledge to do this has existed since 1945. It's been deliberately suppressed to protect contracts and careers." General Harding could remain silent no longer. "Mr. Chairman, I must object to these unsubstantiated allegations. Colonel Thompson has no current role in Army procurement, no access to classified acquisition strategies, and no standing to criticize programs developed by qualified experts." "With respect, General," Thompson replied, "I commanded tanks in combat against superior German models. I watched good men die because our equipment was inadequate. That gives me standing few procurement experts can claim." The subcommittee room had grown tense, the scheduled witnesses and defense industry representatives exchanging concerned glances as Thompson's testimony resonated with several members. "Colonel Thompson," Martinez continued, "you mentioned Operation Paperclip engineers being silenced. Can you provide specific examples?" "Yes, sir. Dr. Klaus Weber, a German production engineer brought to America in 1945, submitted detailed reports recommending adoption of German efficiency methods for American tank manufacturing. After repeated attempts to implement these recommendations, he was removed from his position in 1950 and effectively forced into academic retirement. Thompson paused, then delivered the information he knew would change the dynamic of the hearing. 3 days ago, Dr. Weber was assaulted in his home in Ann Arbor, Michigan, after speaking with me about his experiences. He remains hospitalized. His technical documentation was stolen, and his house ransacked. A murmur ran through the room. This was no longer merely about historical procurement decisions. It had become a matter of potential criminal activity reaching into the present. "Are you suggesting that current defense interests were involved in this assault?" Martinez asked, his expression grave. "I am stating that Dr. Weber was attacked immediately after providing me with information critical of established procurement practices. His technical documentation, which could have significantly improved American tank design, was specifically targeted. I leave it to this committee and appropriate law enforcement agencies to determine who would benefit from such actions." At the back of the room, the DIS agents conferred briefly, then one left hurriedly. Thompson suspected they were recalculating their approach now that Weber's assault had been publicly connected to the procurement investigation. The chairman, visibly uncomfortable with the direction the hearing had taken, attempted to regain control. "While these allegations are troubling, they go beyond the scope of today's session. I suggest that proper authorities investigate any criminal actions, while this committee focuses on the procurement package before us." "Mr. Chairman," Martinez interjected, "I believe Colonel Thompson's testimony is directly relevant to our deliberations. If we are about to commit $8 billion to a procurement approach that ignores superior manufacturing methods, we have a responsibility to investigate before proceeding." Other members began to voice similar concerns. The chairman, recognizing that he had lost control of the narrative, reluctantly agreed to a 1-week delay on the appropriation vote pending review of Thompson's documentation. As the hearing adjourned, Thompson remained at the witness table gathering his notes. He was not surprised when General Harding approached him. "You've made a serious mistake, Thompson," the general said quietly, his face rigid with controlled anger. 30 years out of uniform, and you still don't understand how the system works." "I understand perfectly, General. The system works to perpetuate itself, not to provide the best equipment to American soldiers. You have no idea of the complications involved in modern procurement, the political realities, the industrial-based considerations, the technological trade-offs. What I understand is that for 3 decades, America has built tanks the hard way because it's more profitable for contractors and more comfortable for procurement officers." Thompson met Harding's gaze steadily. "And men like you have built careers facilitating it." Harding's face flushed. "You'll regret this grandstanding. The appropriation will pass, your allegations will be investigated and dismissed, and you'll be remembered as a disgruntled retiree who couldn't adapt to modern realities." "Perhaps, but Dr. Weber's assault changes the equation, doesn't it? Hard to dismiss allegations when they're connected to actual crimes." Before Harding could respond, Thompson noticed Merrick signaling him urgently from the committee room entrance. Excusing himself, he joined the analyst in the hallway. "We need to move quickly," Merrick said, leading him toward a side exit. "DIS agents were planning to detain you after the hearing, but your mention of Weber's assault forced them to reconsider. They're regrouping, probably seeking new authorization." "Where are we going?" "Senator Malcolm's office. He chairs the Senate Armed Services Committee and watched your testimony on the closed-circuit feed. He wants to meet immediately." Thompson followed Merrick through the labyrinthine hallways of the Capitol complex, eventually arriving at a secure office in the Senate wing. Inside, Senator William Malcolm, a silver-haired veteran of both World War II and Korean War combat, was waiting with 2 staffers. "Colonel Thompson," the senator said, extending his hand, "that was quite a performance. You've stirred up a hornet's nest." "Not my intention, Senator. I simply want the truth acknowledged and the lessons implemented. Truth is rarely simple in Washington." Malcolm dismissed his staffers with a nod. When they were alone, he continued, "I've reviewed the preliminary materials Mr. Merrick provided. Your findings about German production methods are persuasive. The documentation of their suppression is concerning. But the assault on Dr. Weber elevates this beyond policy disagreement to potential criminal conspiracy." "That's my assessment as well. The difficulty is proving connection. Defense contractors and procurement officials maintain plausible deniability for such activities operating through layers of intermediaries." Thompson nodded. "I understand the challenges, but Weber's assault provides leverage that mere policy disagreements do not. Precisely why I wanted to meet. Malcolm leaned forward. Tomorrow morning, I'm convening a special session of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Closed door, highest security classification. I want you to present your complete findings, including everything about Weber. I'm also inviting representatives from DARPA to discuss the condensing technology Harrigan informed me about. Thompson felt a surge of cautious optimism. A Senate committee hearing would provide both visibility and protection that had previously been lacking. Who else will attend? Joint Chiefs representatives, Defense Department, acquisition officials, and yes, some defense contractors. I want everyone with skin in the game present when these allegations are aired. Malcolm's expression was grim. I've seen too many promising weapons systems undermined by procurement politics. If what you're saying is true, we've been building inferior tanks at inflated prices for 30 years, while the Soviets have been closing the quality gap. The senator's support was a critical development, but Thompson remained wary. The forces opposing these revelations are powerful and determined, Senator. They've already demonstrated willingness to use intimidation and violence, which is why you'll be under Senate protection until the hearing. I've arranged secure accommodations in this building tonight. My staff will ensure your safety. As Thompson left the senator's office under escort, he felt the momentum shifting. With both DARPA and the Senate Armed Services Committee engaged, the truth had powerful allies. But he harbored no illusions about the desperate measures their opponents might take as their backs were increasingly against the wall. That night, in a secure room deep within the Capitol complex, Thompson finalized his presentation for the Senate committee. He organized their findings into clear, compelling evidence: the German production innovations, their systematic suppression in post-war America, the Soviet adoption of similar methods, and the current implications for American tank manufacturing. He was completing his notes when Harrigan called on the secure line. Weber's been transferred to Walter Reed, his friend reported. Military security, restricted access. He's regained consciousness and has confirmed that his attackers were specifically seeking his technical documentation on German production methods. Has he identified them? Not specifically, but he described one as a military type who seemed familiar with his background and work history. The investigation is proceeding carefully, given the potential connections to defense procurement. What about the condensing technology? Has DARPA reviewed the microfilm? Yes, and they're extremely interested. Their preliminary assessment confirms that the closed-cycle cooling system could be adapted to modern tank engines with significant benefits for range and thermal signature reduction. They're preparing a detailed presentation for tomorrow's Senate hearing. Thompson felt vindication tempered with caution. Be careful, Jim. The closer we get to exposing this, the more desperate our opposition becomes. I'm taking precautions. Military escort, secure communications only. I've been in this game a long time, Bill. After completing his preparation, Thompson tried to sleep, but rest proved elusive. His mind kept returning to those burning Sherman tanks in Germany, to the men who had died because American industry had prioritized quantity over quality. He thought of Weber, an old man attacked for trying to share knowledge that could save American lives. And he thought of the institutional forces still working to preserve their profitable inefficiency at the expense of combat effectiveness. Morning brought renewed determination. Thompson dressed in his civilian clothes but pinned his combat decorations to his lapel, a silent reminder of the battlefield realities underlying procurement decisions. Senator Malcolm's aide escorted him to the secure hearing room deep within the Senate building. Unlike the open subcommittee session the previous day, this hearing was closed to the public and press. Armed guards checked credentials at the door, and all electronic devices were prohibited. Inside, the room was arranged with a witness table facing a semicircular committee dais. To one side sat military officers, including representatives from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. To the other side were Defense Department officials, among them procurement specialists and acquisition experts. In the rear were the defense contractors, their expensive suits and confident demeanors betraying no concern about the proceedings. Senator Malcolm called the hearing to order with a gravity that immediately established its importance. This special session of the Senate Armed Services Committee has been convened to address serious allegations regarding American tank procurement and production methodologies. The matters before us touch on national security, fiscal responsibility, and potentially criminal activity directed against individuals with relevant information. He introduced Thompson as the first witness, emphasizing his combat experience and long history of advocating for improved tank design and production. Thompson presented their findings methodically, building the case with documentary evidence and testimony. He explained the German production philosophy that balanced efficiency and effectiveness, detailed its systematic suppression in post-war America, and outlined its adoption by Soviet tank manufacturers. The result, he concluded, is that America continues to build tanks inefficiently at excessive cost, while the Soviets have closed much of the quality gap while maintaining their numerical advantage. In any extended conflict, this disparity could prove decisive. The military officers listened with growing concern, particularly when Thompson directly compared the production efficiency of Soviet T-72s with American M60s. The procurement officials were more defensive, frequently interrupting with technical objections that Thompson calmly refuted with data from their research. When he described Weber's assault, the atmosphere in the room changed perceptibly. This was no longer merely a policy dispute. It had criminal implications that no one could comfortably dismiss. After Thompson concluded, DARPA representatives presented their analysis of the German condensing technology found on Weber's microfilm. Their enthusiasm was evident as they described the potential applications to modern tank engines. This technology, properly implemented, could increase operational range by up to 40%, while reducing thermal signature by approximately 60%, explained Dr. Lawson, the lead DARPA engineer. Both capabilities would provide significant tactical advantages in any battlefield scenario. And this technology has been available since 1944, Senator Malcolm asked. The basic concept, yes. It would have required adaptation to internal combustion engines rather than steam, but the principles are sound. With modern materials and engineering, we believe full implementation is achievable within 3 years. The implications hung heavy in the air. A game-changing technology had been effectively buried for 30 years, denied to American tank crews who could have benefited from its advantages. As the hearing progressed, the defensive contractor representatives finally had their opportunity to speak. Richard Carmichael, CEO of Dynamo Defense Systems, presented a polished rebuttal emphasizing the complexities of modern tank production. While Colonel Thompson's historical analysis is interesting, it fails to account for the integrated systems approach of modern armor, Carmichael argued smoothly. Today's tanks are not merely mechanical platforms, but sophisticated electronic warfare systems. Our production methodologies reflect these complexities. Yet the Soviets have managed to incorporate similar electronics while maintaining production efficiency, Thompson countered. The T-72's fire control system is less sophisticated than ours, but its production cost per unit is approximately 1/3 that of an M60. At significantly reduced effectiveness, Carmichael insisted. That gap is narrowing with each production run, Thompson replied. And in terms of pure numbers, they maintain a 6-to-1 advantage. Quality eventually succumbs to quantity, as the Germans discovered in 1945. The debate continued for hours, technical arguments interspersed with broader strategic considerations. Throughout, Thompson maintained his focus on the core issue. For 30 years, America had built tanks inefficiently because it was profitable for contractors and comfortable for procurement officials, not because it produced the best equipment for soldiers. As the hearing neared its conclusion, General Harding requested time to address the committee. His earlier hostility toward Thompson had been replaced with a more measured approach. While I maintain that Colonel Thompson's criticisms of current procurement practices are overstated, I cannot in good conscience dismiss the production efficiency data he has presented, Harding stated carefully. If the Soviets have indeed adapted German manufacturing methods to achieve both quality and quantity, we must reevaluate our approach. It was a strategic retreat, Thompson realized. With both DARPA and key senators clearly convinced by the evidence, Harding was positioning himself as reasonable and open to reform. Senator Malcolm concluded the hearing with a clear directive. Based on the compelling evidence presented today, this committee will recommend a comprehensive review of current tank procurement and production methodologies. The proposed $8 billion contract with Dynamo Defense Systems will be delayed pending this review. He fixed Carmichael with a stern gaze. Furthermore, we expect full cooperation from all defense contractors in implementing any recommended changes, including adoption of more efficient production methods and integration of the condensing technology presented by DARPA. Turning to the military representatives, Malcolm continued, General Harding, the committee appreciates your willingness to reevaluate current practices. We expect the Army to lead this review with complete transparency and a commitment to maximizing both production efficiency and combat effectiveness. Finally, he addressed the elephant in the room. Regarding the assault on Dr. Weber and the theft of his technical documentation, this committee will formally request that the FBI assume jurisdiction from the Defense Investigative Service, given the potential conflicts of interest involved. The protection of individuals with relevant information to this investigation is paramount. As the hearing adjourned, Thompson felt a complex mixture of vindication, relief, and caution. They had successfully brought the truth to light and secured commitments for reform, but powerful interests had been challenged, and their response remained unpredictable. Senator Malcolm approached him as the room cleared. "You've done your country a service today, Colonel. Not many men would have persisted against such formidable opposition. The men who died in inferior tanks deserve no less, Senator. There will be resistance to implementation, bureaucratic delays, technical objections, budget constraints. The system protects itself instinctively." Thompson nodded. "I'm prepared for a long fight. You won't fight alone. This committee will maintain oversight, and I've secured agreement from key House members to support the necessary appropriations for implementing these reforms." As Thompson left the Capitol under Senate security escort, he spotted Carmichael and other defense executives in intense conversation with several congressional staffers. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, it would be fought in the open rather than through buried reports and silenced experts. 3 months later, Thompson stood on the testing grounds at Aberdeen Proving Grounds, watching as a modified M60 tank maneuvered through a challenging obstacle course. Beside him, Harrigan monitored the tank's performance data on a portable computer. "Thermal signature is down 57% compared to the standard model," Harrigan reported with satisfaction. "Range is extended by nearly 35% on the same fuel load. DARPA's adaptation of Weber's condensing technology has exceeded expectations." The tank completed the course and rolled to a stop nearby. The commander's hatch opened, and a young captain emerged, removing his helmet. "What do you think, Colonel Thompson?" he called down. "Handles better than the standard M60, and we've been running all day on one fuel load." "Impressive," Thompson replied. "Any issues with the new cooling system?" "None so far. Engine temperature remains stable even under heavy load, and the reduced heat signature gives us a significant advantage in simulated combat conditions." The successful tests represented tangible progress, but the broader reforms to tank production methodologies were advancing more slowly against entrenched resistance. Some defense contractors, led by Carmichael's Dynamo, continued to argue that German production methods were not applicable to modern manufacturing requirements. Congressional allies of the defense industry raised concerns about job losses if production was streamlined. Yet momentum had shifted decisively. With DARPA's enthusiastic backing, the condensing technology was proceeding rapidly toward full implementation. The Senate Armed Services Committee maintained persistent oversight, preventing the usual bureaucratic burial of unwelcome innovations. And most significantly, younger officers in the armor branch had become champions of reform, recognizing the battlefield advantages of tanks that combine quality with quantity. Weber had recovered sufficiently to consult on the technical aspects of implementation. Though the FBI investigation had not yet identified his attackers, the public nature of the case had provided a measure of protection against further intimidation. As Thompson prepared to leave Aberdeen, Harrigan shared an interesting development. "Dynamo Defense Systems has replaced Carmichael as CEO," he reported. "The new leadership is positioning the company as an innovator in efficient production methods." Thompson smiled at the irony. "Adapting to survive. When they couldn't beat us, they joined us and claimed it was their idea all along. That's how change often happens in systems this entrenched. The same players remain, but they adjust their approach when forced to. As long as the results reach the men in the tanks, I can live with that." 5 years later, Thompson stood on the reviewing stand at Fort Knox, watching as the first production models of the M1 Abrams tank rolled past in formation. The new tank represented a complete rethinking of American armor, incorporating both the German condensing technology and production methodologies that balanced efficiency with effectiveness. Beside him stood Dr. Weber, now in his 90s but still mentally sharp, his eyes bright as he witnessed the culmination of his life's work. The FBI had eventually traced his attackers to private contractors working for defense interests, though the connection to specific companies had never been definitively established. The public attention had ensured his safety since. It is strange, Weber remarked quietly, his German accent still noticeable after decades in America, to see something I first sketched in 1944 finally becoming reality. Thompson nodded. Too long delayed, but finally implemented. In Germany, during the war, necessity drove innovation. We had no choice but to find more efficient methods. Weber watched the tanks with professional appreciation. Here, abundance became a weakness. Why improve when excess was easier? The most expensive way became the preferred way, Thompson agreed. Until now. General Martinez, the former congressman who had supported Thompson's testimony and later returned to active duty, approached them after the ceremony. What do you think, gentlemen? Worth the fight? Thompson watched the Abrams tanks, sleek and powerful, each one representing a perfect balance of combat effectiveness and production efficiency. Absolutely, what's the current production rate? 40 per month, with capacity to surge to 100 if needed. Unit cost is 30% lower than projected under the old methods, and combat effectiveness metrics exceed all expectations. Weber nodded with satisfaction. As it should be, engineering is not merely about what can be built, but how it can be built most effectively. The transformation hadn't been easy or complete. Pockets of resistance remained within both the defense industry and procurement bureaucracy. But the core principles had taken hold, supported by a new generation of officers and acquisition professionals who recognized that quality and quantity were not mutually exclusive objectives. After the ceremony, Thompson visited the Armor Museum where a special exhibition had been established to document the evolution of American tank production. Among the displays was a section dedicated to the Thompson-Weber reforms, as they had come to be known within the armor community. One photograph showed a Sherman tank burning on a European battlefield, a stark reminder of the real costs of procurement decisions. Beside it was a quote from Thompson's Senate testimony. The purpose of a tank is not to generate contracts or advance careers. It is to fight and win battles while keeping its crew alive. Thompson paused before the photograph, remembering. April 1945 seemed both yesterday and a lifetime ago. He could still smell the diesel and cordite, still hear the screams of men trapped in burning Shermans. He touched the image gently, a silent acknowledgement of their sacrifice. They deserved better, he whispered to himself. Beside the historical displays was a technical section explaining the German production methodology and its modern application. Interactive exhibits demonstrated how design simplification and assembly optimization had transformed the manufacturing process. One display compared the production hours required for an M60 Patton tank, approximately 92,000, with those needed for an M1 Abrams, approximately 45,000 pounds, despite the latter's more advanced capabilities. The museum had also recreated a portion of Weber's office, including technical drawings of the condensing system and his notes on production efficiency. A video presentation featured interviews with both Weber and Thompson, explaining the 30-year journey from suppression to implementation. As he studied the exhibition, Thompson was approached by a young lieutenant wearing armor branch insignia. "Colonel Thompson, I thought that was you." The officer extended his hand. "Lieutenant Michael Jameson, I just wanted to thank you, sir." "For what, Lieutenant?" "For the Abrams. My father commanded a tank in Vietnam, an M48. He told me stories about its limitations, the breakdowns, the vulnerability. He said they always felt outmatched by the Soviet equipment. But the Abrams?" The young officer shook his head in admiration. "It's a different world. We have the best tank on the battlefield now, and enough of them to make a difference." Thompson felt a deep satisfaction that transcended the political battles and bureaucratic resistance. This was what had mattered all along, ensuring that American tank crews had the best possible equipment, built in the most effective possible way. "Your father was in Vietnam?" Thompson asked. "Yes, sir. 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines, attached armored support during Operation Prairie in '66. Rough country for tanks." That's what he said. Mechanical nightmares in that terrain and climate. Half their time was spent on maintenance. The lieutenant smiled. He wouldn't believe the reliability numbers on the Abrams. Mean time between failures is up over 250% compared to the M48s he drove. Thompson nodded. That's the German influence. They understood that a tank that breaks down never reaches the battlefield. My father would have appreciated that wisdom. Jameson hesitated. He didn't make it back from his second tour. His tank hit a mine near the DMZ in '68. Thompson met the young officer's gaze. "I'm sorry. That's why your work mattered so much to me personally, sir. Every improvement in those machines saves lives." "Just do one thing for me, Lieutenant," Thompson said. "What's that, sir?" "Remember that tanks are built by systems, but they're crewed by men. Never stop pushing for improvements, even when the system resists." "I'll remember that, Colonel." The conversation was interrupted by an announcement that a demonstration of the Abrams capabilities would begin shortly on the nearby testing grounds. Thompson joined a group of officers and civilian officials making their way to the viewing stands. The demonstration was impressive. Abrams tanks maneuvering at speeds that would have been impossible for earlier models. Precision gunnery at extended ranges. Rapid deployment and recovery techniques that showcased both the tank's capabilities and the crew's proficiency. Most striking to Thompson was the thermal signature demonstration. Using infrared cameras, the observers could see how the Abrams heat signature was dramatically reduced compared to the M60 running the same course. The German condensing technology, updated and enhanced by DARPA engineers, had transformed one of the most significant vulnerabilities of modern tanks. "Remarkable difference," commented Senator Malcolm, who had joined Thompson in the stands. "Soviet infrared systems would struggle to acquire these at any significant distance. And the operational range is nearly doubled," Thompson added. "These tanks could penetrate deep behind enemy lines and return without refueling. All because a German engineer designed a better cooling system for locomotives in 1940. Malcolm shook his head in wonder. "And we almost missed it entirely." "We did miss it for 30 years, but not forever. That's the important part." The senator studied Thompson thoughtfully. "You know, when you first brought this to my committee, many of my colleagues thought you were just a disgruntled retiree with an axe to grind. Defense contractors were calling my office hourly, warning that you would undermine America's entire defense procurement system." "They weren't entirely wrong about that part," Thompson admitted. Malcolm laughed. "No, they weren't. But what they failed to understand was that the system needed undermining. It had become self-serving rather than serving the national defense." He gestured toward the Abrams tanks now forming up in a final display. "These machines are the vindication of your persistence. Better tanks, built more efficiently, at lower cost. Exactly what you promised." After the demonstration concluded, Thompson found himself surrounded by junior officers eager to discuss the new tanks and the production philosophy that had made them possible. Their enthusiasm was infectious, their technical questions insightful. This new generation understood instinctively what had taken Thompson decades to prove, that intelligent design and efficient production were complementary rather than contradictory goals. Later that afternoon, Thompson met with Carter and Wilson for the first time in several years. Both had weathered the professional storms that followed their involvement in the investigation. Carter had eventually received tenure and now headed the Production Systems Engineering Department at her university. Wilson had transitioned to DARPA, where his data analysis skills had proven invaluable in implementing the new production methodologies. "I hardly recognize the place," Carter said as they shared coffee in the officers' club. "When we started this fight, Fort Knox was still training tankers on M60s built using 1950s production methods. Now they're at the cutting edge of both technology and manufacturing philosophy. The cultural change is even more significant than the technical improvements," Wilson added. "Procurement officers now evaluate production efficiency as a primary factor, not an afterthought. Engineering teams are incentivized to simplify designs rather than complicate them." "And the defense contractors?" Thompson asked. "Adapting as businesses do." Carter smiled wryly. "They've discovered that efficient production can still be profitable, especially with the increased volume. Some of the most resistant companies 5 years ago are now the loudest advocates for the new approach. Dynamo defense systems in particular," Wilson noted. "After Carmichael was forced out, the new management embraced the German production methods completely. They're now producing Abrams components at record rates with higher quality metrics than ever before." "And their profit margins? Lower per unit, but higher overall due to volume. They're doing fine." Wilson's expression turned serious. "The real victory isn't that we change the tanks. It's that we change the thinking about how tanks should be built." Thompson nodded in agreement. The cultural shift was indeed the most significant achievement. After decades of resistance, the American defense establishment had finally embraced the principle that combat effectiveness and production efficiency could be mutually reinforcing rather than competing priorities. As the day drew to a close, Thompson found himself alone at the tank testing grounds, watching the sunset paint the Kentucky hills in shades of gold and crimson. A single Abrams tank remained on the field, its crew performing final maintenance before returning to the motor pool. Thompson approached as the young tank commander supervised the procedure. "Everything running smoothly, Captain?" he asked. The officer turned and smiled. "Like a Swiss watch, sir. This machine is a dream compared to what my instructors told me about the old M60s. Thompson walked around the tank, admiring its clean lines and purposeful design. Every aspect reflected the principle of intelligent simplification. Complex where complexity added value, streamlined where simplicity enhanced function. "You know," the captain said, "we studied your testimony in Command and Staff College. The case study on defense procurement reform. You changed the whole system." Thompson shook his head. "I just helped uncover what should have been obvious all along. The Germans figured it out 30 years before we did, out of necessity. Still, it took courage to challenge the established way of doing things, especially when so many powerful interests wanted to maintain the status quo. It wasn't courage so much as obligation." Thompson ran his hand along the Abrams' armored flank. "I commanded tanks in combat. I lost men because our equipment wasn't as good as it could have been. I owed them better." The captain nodded in understanding. "Well, sir, speaking for those of us who crew these tanks today, we're grateful. This machine will bring my people home alive." "That's all that ever mattered," Thompson replied. As Thompson left the testing grounds, he paused to watch another formation of Abrams tanks maneuvering on the distant training grounds. Their fluid movement and coordinated action spoke of both mechanical excellence and crew proficiency. In his mind, he saw again those burning Shermans in Germany, heard the screams of men trapped in inadequate machines. But now those painful memories were tempered by the knowledge that their sacrifice had not been entirely in vain. 30 years too late, but finally the lessons had been learned. America had rediscovered what the Germans had known amid the desperation of total war. That true military effectiveness came not from gold-plated complexity or profit-maximizing inefficiency, but from intelligent design, focused engineering, and production methods that balanced quality with quantity. And somewhere, Thompson hoped, the ghosts of those lost tankers could rest a little easier, knowing that those who followed them would fight with the best equipment their nation could provide, built the right way for the right reasons. The battle for the future of American tank production was over. The truth had prevailed.